In this video, I'll be exploring the character of Iago in Shakespeare's Othello, in particular looking at Iago's views on love and sex and women, and how those are influenced by Iago's perception of his own masculinity and the expectations within society of that masculinity and the insecurity that comes with that, but also considering Iago as being a product of his society in regards to his views on love, masculinity, and insecurity. For Iago, love is viewed in almost purely physical terms. He discusses love first of all in Act 1, Scene 3 in conversation with Roderigo, and he says to Roderigo, it is merely a lust of the blood and a permission of the will. The word merely is important first of all. It's very dismissive from Iago. Iago is not a character or a man who engages in ideas of love. We'll discuss why he's so dismissive of love a bit later on, but certainly he is dismissive. Love is not spontaneous for Iago. It is innate, that's for sure. He says it's of the blood. But he also says it is a permission of the will. It seems for Iago that he has control over whether he loves or not. And for Iago, love is very much a tool with which he manipulates others and constructs his own idea of his identity. Love is not emotional. It is a lust of the blood. And for Iago, lust and love are one and the same thing. There doesn't seem to be any distinction between the two. And this physicality surrounding love manifests itself in Iago's use of gustatory language and imagery to describe love and sex. This is also taken from the same scene, Act 1, Scene 3. And he says to Roderigo, the food that to him now is as lush, to him is now as luscious as locusts, shall be to him shortly as acerb as colonquitida. She must change for youth. When she is sated with his body, she will find the error of her choice. Well, here he's referring to Othello and Desdemona. First of all, Desdemona is portrayed as food, something to be consumed by Othello. And he describes it, interestingly, as luscious as locusts. I mean, not an image we would immediately think of to describe the love between a man and a woman. It's interesting that locusts are an insect which consume on a mighty scale, and they are relentless in their consumption, and they consume to the point of destruction. And that seems to sum up how Iago views love. It is something to be consumed, to use to consume others, but also to be consumed, and in that is an inherent fear, which we'll come on to later. He also inflicts Desdemona with this same idea. She is sated with his body, she will find the error of her choice, as if for Desdemona the only motivation for her marriage to Othello is a sexual one. And this idea of consumption, man consuming woman and woman consuming man, is one that he comes back to again and again. And as was hinted there, he inflicts this view onto Desdemona. Now, he constantly talks about her in the terms of consumption and gustatory imagery. Her eye must be fed, he says, in Act 2, Scene 1, and then in Act 2, Scene 3, even as her appetite shall play God with his weak function. We're noticing more and more the use of predatory imagery to describe Desdemona. And it seems throughout the play that Iago's inflicting of these ideas of consumption and appetite onto women is actually a manifestation of his fear of female sexuality. He seems to be really afraid of the sexual possibility of women. And we'll look at the reasons why as we go through this presentation. It's important to remember that Desdemona is the most divine, the most pure, the most loyal, and the most chaste character in this play. And so it is surely significant that even with her, even for Desdemona, for Iago, she is a typical woman, a predator, someone who wants to consume him and other men. This idea is relentless for Iago. It is all-consuming. It's not just Desdemona, though. This is his general view of women in the play. He says about women, and this is to Desdemona and Emilia in Act 2, Scene 3, you rise to play and go to bed to work. Here Iago is insinuating, as he does so often in the play, that women are no different from prostitutes. It's important to consider why Iago does this throughout the play. I think it is Iago's way of belittling the power of women, and it is a way of soothing his own insecurities. He belittles women by putting them down in order to restore patriarchal order, the man as dominant, but he also does it to soothe his own masculine insecurities. If women are promiscuous whores, then them cheating on him is not seen as such a shameful thing. So he turns them all into promiscuous whores in order to soothe his own insecurity about being cheated on, and this comes through again and again in the play. And as I've hinted at there, this drive towards his obsession with female sexuality and the power of female sexuality and the predatory nature of female sexuality can all be linked to his own ideas about jealousy and insecurity. In Act 3, Scene 3, he talks to Othello about jealousy, and he says it is the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on. Again here, jealousy now becomes the predator. Jealousy becomes all-consuming. And this is all down to the fear of emasculation, the desperate fear that his wife will cheat on him, the desperate fear that he cannot satisfy his wife. And that is why he has to depict love in such physical and disloyal and promiscuous terms. And this fear and insecurity surrounding the pressures of masculinity, the idealized version of masculinity, the man as dominant, the man as able to satisfy his wife sexually, the man as able to control his wife. Iago is a man who is troubled by this idea and overcome with insecurities about it. In Act 1, Scene 3, he starts to create motives for his hatred and his revenge against Othello and eventually against Cassio. He says, it is thought abroad that twixt my sheets he's done my office. Well, first of all, when he says thought abroad, he's trying to distance himself clearly from this infidelity and therefore distancing himself from the shame that it would bring. And then he says, twixt my sheet, he's done my office. Well, office is important here because clearly Iago sees it as his masculine duty to sexually satisfy his wife. And that is where the shame comes from. In Act 2, Scene 1, a bit later, he talks about Othello leaping into his seat and Cassio with my nightcap too. You'll notice again, it's my office, my seat, my nightcap. Iago is really concerned with this idea of duty as the man. His idea of love is the duty of satisfying sexually his wife or his partner, and the fear of his wife cheating on him with another man and the shame that that would bring. So all of this belittling of women, this labeling women as promiscuous whores, all comes from an inherent insecurity about his own masculinity and identity. But it does seem that masculine's insecurity is not just for Iago. It is ubiquitous within this society because Othello increasingly reveals to us his inherent fear of cuckoldry and infidelity too. Now, we could argue, of course, that Othello has purely been manipulated by Iago and starts to mirror Iago's own fears and insecurities and language. But we could argue that actually Othello here is revealing, and there are lots of clues in Act 3, Scene 3, that Othello is starting to reveal the truth of himself, and it isn't just constructed by Iago. He says in 3:3, "O curse of marriage that we could call these women ours and not their appetites." So Othello, like Iago, is starting to refer to love in gustatory terms. He again fears the predatory nature and the predatory possibility of female sexuality. And he also, like Iago, is desperately afraid of becoming a cuckold, of having his wife cheat on him. He talks about the forked plague, which is the symbol of the cuckold, the man with horns. He talks about it as destiny unshunnable, like death. For Othello, similarly to Iago, female promiscuity and infidelity is a certainty. And he talks about a horned man's a monster and a beast. Without a loyal wife, a man is stripped of his humanity. He becomes beast-like. He becomes something more primitive. So just like for Iago, Othello is equally afraid of the woman. And that is what makes love so difficult for both of these men. That with love comes the promise of promiscuity and the promise and the inevitability of infidelity. So love is problematic for both of these characters. Now, it's very easy to see, and it's perfectly valid to see, Iago as purely villainous and evil. But we can also read Iago as a product or even a victim of his society and its attitudes and its demands. Because it is because of the expectations of masculine dominance and the ability for a man to satisfy his wife both in the home and in marriage and in bed that causes Iago to be so bitter and to be so insecure. So in some small way he is perhaps a victim of societal expectation. And he is also, as far as he is concerned, in many ways, in his views of love and sex and women, only mirroring the attitudes of the society in which he lives and the society for whom the play is first being performed. In Act 2, Scene 3, he speaks directly to the audience in his soliloquy, and he says, "And what's he then that says I play the villain?" Here he is talking directly to the audience and saying, "Who are you to criticise me when I am only reflecting your attitudes?" Let's not forget, up to this point in the play, the audience has laughed along with Iago. They've laughed at his crude innuendo. They've laughed at his sexually explicit jokes. They've laughed at his prejudicial views against Othello's skin colour. And so this is a really powerful moment of self-reflection for the audience. If they've laughed at him, are they then complicit in his own views? Very powerful moment from Iago where he questions the audience, and he does it again in his final words in the play in Act 5, Scene 2. He says, "Demand me nothing. What you know, you know. From this point forth I will speak no more." He's saying to the audience again here, everything I've done is what you knew already. I haven't revealed anything to you about human nature that you didn't already know. So Iago is exposing the fact, and Shakespeare is allowing him to expose the fact, that in some ways he is just a product of the society in which he lives. So whilst we are unquestionably encouraged to criticise Iago's crude physical view of love, we are also encouraged in some smaller way to criticise society's views of men and women and love and sex. The handkerchief is the symbol of love in the play, and it is with this handkerchief that Iago is absolutely obsessed. We learn from Emilia that he has constantly asked her to steal this handkerchief. Iago recognises its importance. He recognises its importance because it is a love token given to Desdemona by Othello. But this handkerchief comes to represent so much more than pure love. Yes, it is a symbol of love. It is a token given by Othello to his wife. But it is also a symbol of insecurity. As Othello tells us, it was used by his mother to subdue his father entirely to her love. It is also, therefore, a symbol of betrayal and promiscuity, because it comes with the expectation of betrayal. Otherwise, it wouldn't need to be given. And it also becomes a symbol of deceit as it is passed between character and from character to character within the play, from Emilia to Iago, from Iago to Cassio, from Cassio to Bianca. And so all the characters become linked by this symbol of love. And it seems that this is the most appropriate symbol for love in the play, because love for Shakespeare and for Iago is also intertwined with ideas of insecurity, betrayal, promiscuity, and deceit. So it is the perfect symbol for Iago to use in his machinations and his plots against Othello and the other characters. Ultimately, we have to decide whether Shakespeare is encouraging us to be critical of love per se, or critical of Iago's view of love. And in the end, it seems that, yes, Shakespeare is questioning the very possibility of love in a patriarchal society which places such demands on men and women. But ultimately, it is Iago's crude, sexualized view of love that we are encouraged to criticize, because Emilia says in Act 3, Scene 4, they are all but stomachs, and we are but food. They eat us hungrily, and when they are full, they belch us. It is left to Emilia to recognize the truth of this patriarchal society, that it is the men who are dominant. It is the men who consume women. It is the men who use love for their own means. And when they are satisfied, they are done with these women. So Iago's views of women are ultimately ill-founded, and Emilia exposes and belittles Iago's views of love further and further towards the end of the play. I hope that's been a useful insight into Iago, and particularly his views of love, sex, women, and masculinity. There's lots more to explore regarding Iago's character, but I hope that element has been of interest.